Hello, Lisa, and hello to everyone joining us here today.
Welcome to Tennis Takeaways. I'm Lisa Stone, creator of Parenting Aces, a former tennis parent myself, and we're thrilled to be here with you and my co host.
I'm Dewey Evans, and I am a performance architect working to develop online content, helping parents and players move themselves forward. I'm also a coach at the Austin Tennis Academy in Austin, Texas.
Well, we've got a great show for you today. We've decided to pivot back to junior tennis. And now that there's so many tournaments coming back on the schedule, more regional play happening, we thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about what we're seeing in the junior competition arena. And Dewey has some personal experience. I'm just reading about it from the Parenting Aces community and from the coaches that I'm in contact with. So, Dewey, tell us what's going on out there.
Well, competition has opened up again. Kids are starting to play. A lot of the things that we anticipated would happen are definitely happening. Play is more regional and local. And at this point in time, some kids are faring a little bit better. Some kids are letting the nerves kind of jump in and get them at this point in time. We've seen bunches of kids pulling out of tournaments midway through with injuries because they're used to playing now, but they're not used to all of the intense changes of direction and the demands on their body physically of actual competition. And we're looking at people trying to figure out, well, what is this going to be without the national events being on the schedule? So there's some USTA now. There's still a lot of UTR going away, and I think there's an opportunity to look at this to kind of change up where things are going to be. You talk to a lot more coaches in different places than I do, Lisa, every day. What are things you're hearing from other people?
Well, like you said, it's a lot of regional play coming back, which interestingly, when UTR first came on the scene, that was their mission, right? Was to keep kids close to home, to compete against people in the community, and kind of that whole Wayne Bryan mindset of, first you need to be the best kid on your block, then the best kid in your neighborhood, then the best kid in your town. And then if you get to that place where you're beating everybody where you live, then you start traveling for competition, looking for things that are a little more challenging. But what's happening right now, because of COVID-19 and because USTA has taken these national tournaments off the schedule, everything is being left on the USTA side to the individual sections to decide what tournaments they want to offer and the format that they're going to use. And on the UTR side, we're seeing all sorts of creativity. So I've done a couple of Facebook Lives, actually a few Facebook Lives with some different folks, different coaches. One in particular is using a format that I thought was so interesting, and that's Scott Hamback. And he's in the southern section, and he is using actually a timed format for matches. So families know exactly when their kids' match will start and the latest point at which it will end. Of course, it could end sooner than that, but if the match is still going on when that, I think it's a 2 hour mark, when that hits, you're done. Whatever the score is at that point, that's the score of the match, and then you move on. And so the goal for that was to keep things moving so that wouldn't be throngs of people hovering around the tournament desk waiting to get put on court or whatever. And everything's being done through an app, the Match Tennis app, which is growing and changing every day to accommodate these needs right now for contactless tournaments, so to speak. And he's gotten some great feedback. Of course, there are people that don't like that, but I think we all just are having to open our minds a little bit and accept the fact that tennis may not look like it has traditionally, but at the same time, we're kind of getting back to that notion of regional play like it was when you and I were kids.
Yeah, and I think you, Lisa, are more of a traditionalist than I am.
I
I
am.
think
Very
I
much
think the
so.
sport has been rubbish for a very long time for a lot of things, particularly for spectator view. When you and I were kids, it was exciting because there were a lot more personalities, and then we got into the whole you have to contain your emotions and do all of these things, and it kind of fell apart. A lot of things fell apart in tennis, and as I mentioned last week, I was watching, listening to, and podcast, and it might have actually been on discussion that we had not on the show, but I was listening to Noah Rubin talk about how he can't even watch a full Grand Slam tennis
Yeah.
match. He'll watch some of the first set and then hope that it goes into a fifth set, and he'll try to turn back on when he thinks it'll be there because most of it's just boring. And even talking about pros tanking sets in the middle of matches, going, after winning two sets and then getting down a break in the third and tanking that set and hoping to come back in the next one. There's a lot of things broken about the sport.
Yeah.
And I think we have a chance to get back to a place where things don't revolve around the competition. Competition is fit in as a piece to the development puzzle of how do you get someone from just beginning the game to whatever the highest place that they will be is. And I think we've gotten too much to where everything revolves around the tournaments, and unfortunately there's always a tournament. And what most people
Yeah.
don't realize is the reason that there is always a tournament, or initially started always being a tournament, was people would set their periodization schedules and wanting to have enough events in the calendar that wherever they were in that process, in that cycle, and they needed to jump in at some level of competition to try something that they were working on in a developmental phase, and so using in a pre-competition and then a lower level of competition, that those events were there so that they could plug them into a calendar that they were making, that maybe just had competition here as part of that module. And then you figure out where the tournaments are. All of a sudden, and I know in Texas and probably Southern section too, there's so many
Oh my
sectional
gosh.
events.
Yeah.
And I
Multiple
don't know how many
tournaments
there
each
are. And
weekend.
yeah, like I don't know how many. Well, they're level three. We're level threes in Southern section, so there was kind of one of them every weekend. There were designateds. I'm not sure how often there were designateds. I think when I first moved to Southern section, there were 5 designateds kind of in the
Yeah.
spring, and then there were 3 in the fall. And it was really for that reason that spring was gearing up for some major tournaments. So there were ones leading up to Easter Bowl, and there were ones that were leading up to the summer type things. And then the fall, there weren't as many because that was time where people were taking an assessment of where they were and making changes in their game. But I'm sure that people have added those events, more events to the calendar. I know in Texas, there is the highest level of competition is called the Super Champs, and there is a Super Champ major zone every single solitary month. And most
Wow.
kids feel obligated to play the Super Champ major zone every single solitary month. Well, you know, 3.5 weeks in between events isn't enough time to make any kind of significant change in your game.
Hmm. Well, I
So
think it's interesting that you're pointing out that the reason so many tournaments were there were to accommodate the periodization schedules of a variety of players, not so that a player could play every single weekend in a tournament. And somehow, with the points per round ranking system and now with UTR, we've gotten into this mindset that, if our kid misses a big event, that they're going to be behind their peers, when this was not the reason that the system was set up. And I think, part of this is a re-education of the junior coaches and how they guide the families in terms of tournament play, and making sure there really is a periodization schedule with a calendar saying, in this week we're doing this, and this week we're doing this, and you have maybe 6 weeks of training, and then boom, you plug in a tournament. And then you come back and you may have 6 more weeks of training, or maybe you play a couple tournaments back to back because you had a bad weekend, and you want to go right back out, get back on the horse, so to speak, and try again. And then once the coaches are re-educated, then they re-educate the parents, and we can all kind of get on the same page about how tournaments need to be used in the whole junior development process.
Yeah, I think it's not totally dissimilar to how the pros look at it. If you when you look at the lead up to the U.S. Open, um, players are playing different amounts. So if I think that I'm going to be, I'm going to be 70 in the world and I might win a round or a couple rounds at the U.S. Open, I'm playing more of the summer events because some of those bigger summer events, the Torontos and things of the world, those are big events. Like that might be one where I could make a splash. And so I'm
Mm-hmm.
leading up, playing a couple of really smaller ones to lead up to there, where you'll see the people who are going to be the top seeds at the Open not played those ones. And so they're playing like a Toronto as their lead up to the U.S. Open. And what happens every once in a while, and juniors could take great lesson from this, is somebody gets hot really early in the summer. And now all of a sudden they're having so much more success than they ever planned, and they're playing deep into the draw week after week after week. And by the time the Open comes, they are kaput. They're done.
Yeah.
Nothing left in the tank, running on empty. And you'll hear the top players say, when they play a bad match that early in the summer, I don't really care. All I'm
Yeah.
working some stuff out. I played well enough. I'm just getting in some match play because it does feel a little bit different in the competition of a tournament than it does playing a practice match against
Right.
somebody. And then that's where you kind of got to know, well, where does this fit in? Is this a tournament that I'm playing because I've now taken and shut everything down, made a huge change, done it in my lessons, I've done it in practice matches, and now I'm playing a lower level tournament to see how does it feel with that extra pressure of competition on it, and then know where's the highest level that you're going to probably play, and always having this scale of performance versus outcome. And then as you get closer to the biggest tournaments you're going to play, if I'm in the finals of a Grand Slam, I couldn't give a hoot about performance. All I care about is winning. I can play the absolute
Right.
worst match performance wise, but if I win that, I'm happy as a pig in poop. And so understanding what that is, but if I'm also playing the first round, I'm working some stuff out. I'm doing the things, and I'm going to use some names. There was a big tennis family from Jackson, Georgia, called by the name of the Burdettes. And the Burdettes had multiple kids go through, and most of the girls all played at Stanford, and they did
Yep.
fairly well. Andy started them out by playing at West Point. And I remember very specifically Lindsay talking about working on some things in the first round of a designated that she knew she was going to need against the people she considered her big rivals come the semifinals and finals. And that's all those first round matches were for her, was a chance
Hmm.
to try some things on, knowing kind of what's coming and what do I need to be able to do. I don't see most coaches talking to players, although I have to admit I don't spend a ton of time looking at what every coach says to their players, but it doesn't seem like that's an approach that's taken by a lot of coaches at this point in time, and probably should be.
Well, and this whole notion of Back to the Future, which is the title of this week's episode, when we were coming up, it wasn't unusual to go out to tennis courts and see a 14-year-old playing a 40-year-old, right? This was, you just played who was there to play. And by doing that as a junior player, you developed these nuances in your game. You developed these shots in your game that you wouldn't see when you were playing against another 14-year-old, but because you were playing somebody who maybe they didn't play as a kid, maybe they weren't taught proper strokes as, when they learned the game, they just kind of were self-taught or whatever, they picked up the game at a later age, or they like to mess around with their opponents and use all these little trick shots and slice and dice the ball. I have a very strong memory of my son playing against one of his coaches one day, and the coach was slicing and dicing him, toying with him, hitting these nasty drop shots, then lobbing over his head. And my son got so incredibly frustrated and kept saying, "Why are you doing this to me? Why are you doing this to me? This isn't how my opponents play. I'm never going to need to know this stuff in a match." And I, was sitting courtside thinking, "You're missing the point here, son. You need to pay
Yeah.
attention to what he's trying to teach you here." And these are the lessons that you don't get when you're traveling all over the place just seeking competition in your age group, right? And it's something that by necessity with COVID-19 and with the travel restrictions that hopefully most people are paying attention to, and the safety measures that hopefully most people are paying attention to, that you need to be staying close to home. You don't need to be getting on an airplane. You don't need to be staying in a hotel and eating in restaurants. Just stay close to home. Seek out those competitive opportunities that are there. And UTR is providing those opportunities in so many cities across the US right now.
I if I were to go back 20 years, um, more than 20 years, I guess close to 30 years now. When I first moved to Georgia in 1993, they were looking to secede from the southern section. And at that point in time, had Georgia actually left southern section, they would have become the fourth largest section in the country all by themselves, and southern still would have been the largest. That's how big it is. And I thought
Yeah.
at that point in time, why are sections part of the USTA? Wouldn't tennis be very different if every section were its own USTA, so that people were forced to stay because it was looking more and more like the top kids were playing less and less within the
Mm.
section. So the only place you could find that level of competition was outside. And when I look at a place like Texas, Texas is the size of most countries in Europe, or
Yeah.
bigger, right?
Yeah.
So why, if we kept all of those people right here, and I think just heard the other day reminded me, Houston's the fourth largest city in the United States. So there's not like it's not like it's Montana, right? So huge
Right.
land and very few people. There's a lot of people here also, and if all of those kids stayed close to home, what would that look like? The
Mm.
old days of the Jack Kramer Tennis Club in L.A., where those kids were California, or players were California players at that
Yeah.
point in time, and largely from that area. If
Yep.
you look at the book Outliers, well, what are the things that make a magic kind of place happen? There are certain things which all come together, and a lot of those things could happen if people just stayed closer to home. Those
Right.
magic spots where you were just lucky to be born into a certain place where there was an Austin Tennis Academy or Universal Tennis Academy right down the street. So therefore, you got to ride your bike there on a regular basis, and it became the magic place for you. There's a lot more of that could happen, and I think the experience is so much better, right? There's so much color to it when you're doing things close to home, and the guy that's your big rival is also the guy that lives three doors down. Um,
Right.
that
Yeah, and not only that, I mean, we haven't even talked about the financial impact of that, right? If you're not spending 800, 1200, whatever it is per weekend to go travel to some tournament in another part of the country or another part of the world, think of how much stress that would relieve off the family. Not only the money, but also the time necessary, because if you're traveling, you have to tack on an extra day before and an extra day after. And so that's time away from work. It's time away from the rest of your family. It's time away from home and doing the other things that you want to be doing. So why not keep these kids competing in their home area? And I'm already like sensing the argument that we're going to get, which is, my kid's tired of playing the same people over and over again. Well, guess what? They don't have to just play the people in their age group. They can play local college players. They can play adult players. They can play kids younger than them and, work on things in those practice matches.
Yeah, and if you really think about it, that's never going to change. So if you aspire to college tennis or pro tennis, it's the same people. That you talk about someone
Yeah,
who's gone through and played top D1 college tennis, those are the same people that they were competing against in nationals and juniors. Some of those people become
right.
teammates, and that's who they're practicing with. You get to the pro tour, there's only, a half dozen to a dozen new job openings, so to speak, on the pro tour every year. The other people are just firmly entrenched, and every once in a while, a couple people retire or their skills wane, and it lets in a few more. But the reality is, year after year after year, you're playing against the same people. There is no not knowing each other's games and things like that. It is get
Yeah.
used to it.
It's just the
Get
nature of the sport. Right.
Yep.
And what's interesting too, Dewey, I'm reading a tennis history book right now in anticipation of an interview I'm doing on Friday. And when the Pro Tour first started in this country, there were small groups of competitors who played each other every single day, the same match, day after day after day. And they took the tour from city to city, and the same two
Yep.
people competed against one another in every city across the country.
Yeah.
And
Barnstorming. Yep.
yeah. And, they had their roll up court that they took with them, their canvas court that, they took and then they laid it out. And, they had these huge audiences. And I get that things are different now. And, we're never going to get back to that model because, just because I'm in San Clemente and you're in Austin doesn't mean I can't see a match playing in Austin, right? I can watch it on TV
Mhm.
or watch it online. Back then, they didn't have that. So the match in Austin was only for people that lived there to watch. And then the match in San Clemente would only be for the people in San Clemente to watch. So I get that we're never going to get back to that. But as I was reading about it, I just kept thinking about that complaint that we hear from parents all the time that, my kid's sick of playing the same kids over and over again. Well, that's our sport. As you said, there are a handful of players at each level, and that's who you play against.
And I think it should be that way. I think that if you're bored playing them, then try out something different. So if you can beat
Yeah,
them playing one style, can you beat them playing another style if you're an aggressive baseline? Or what happens if you serve volley? Or what happens if you play an entire tournament where you're the number one seed and you use nothing but your slice backhand, so you can't use your
yeah.
two-hander at all? And what kind of additional pressure and what kind of learning can be brought forth by adding those additional little pressures on yourself. I think you can do that when the tournaments don't matter as much. So when you're playing
Mm-hmm.
closer to home, it's not the pinnacle. There are developmental tournaments, developmental competition, but you still feel that pressure of, unfortunately, it's an artificial pressure of results are listed online, and so therefore if I lose to somebody, the people in my academy, my friends, when I show up at the next tournament, they're all going to be talking about how did you lose to
Yeah.
da da da, that's such a bad loss.
Yeah.
But I think back in the day there weren't really good wins and bad losses. I mean, there might have been an, oh wow, you beat that person. But when you talked about a player, it was more in the context of what their game style was and what the strengths and weaknesses were versus what their UTR number was or USTA
Right.
ranking. And so therefore they're higher than you, so you beat them and it was a good win, and they're below you and you lost, and so it's a bad loss. That wasn't until I don't even know when online rankings first became published, but when I moved to Georgia in '93, you didn't see them until the end of the year. I remember when preliminary rankings came
Yeah.
out, and then everybody had to go through their player record and make sure everything was right. And if they wanted to dispute something, so it didn't exist. And the seeding in tournaments really was okay. You had to send it in to the section at that point in time, or the district, and then they would send you back what the seeds were. But nobody knew
Right.
exactly. And there might have been some
Until you
disputed.
showed up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
until you showed up.
Yeah.
And we need to move back to those places. That's my thought. I have a lot of thoughts on it, and I know we've run past our allotted amount of time.
Yeah.
This is an ongoing discussion, and how we get back to getting the most value out of time when resources are becoming more limited. There are a lot of people who just aren't earning what they used to. I heard a discussion about the NFL and what's going on right now, and somebody said, there are no team owners and no players who will undoubtedly make the amount of money in 2020 that they anticipated as 2019 was leaving. So everybody's going to take a hit.
Right. Yeah.
That's
It's
just
just
true.
it's just our reality right now. So we're going to have to adapt, and through adaptation, oftentimes we grow in ways that we never anticipated. So let's hope that's true for tennis. We have a real opportunity right now, and I encourage the coaches and the parents out there to rethink how you approach tournament play with your child, with your player, and rethink what the goal is when a kid signs up to play in a tournament. Take another look at this whole notion of periodization. Take another look at the whole notion of seeking out competition that's outside your age group, that maybe can teach you something and help you along that developmental pathway. And if you have comments or you have questions, or you think we're full of it, or you are going to cheer us on, we'd love to hear from you. And you can always reach me, Lisa, at parentingaces.com. And Dewey is deweyevans at gmail.com. We are here for you. We're all over social media, so seek us out. This show is for you. It's not for us, though we enjoy each other's company and enjoy having these conversations. But we want to present material that you find helpful. So let us hear from you.
Another great week, Lisa. Hope that your week coming up is spectacular, as I hope it is for everyone who's watching. And thank you for being with us today. We'll see you same time next week.